one of the themes that I'll be sharing over this weekend, starting now, is basically the integration of yoga practice, physical yoga, but yoga in its bigger meaning, into everyday life, which is what's happening in our age right now. Monasteries are empty, but temples are full. Yoga studios are full. People are looking for a different way of living. I am a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, which, if you haven't read that book, it's a classic. It helped launch everything that you're doing. He came from India in 1920, and his magnetism in that particular book are a lot of why we're all here right now. These forces, and I don't mean that in a sectarian way, I just mean he was part of the wave that brought all this into the Western world. I was 5 years old when Yogananda died in 1952, so I never met him. But some 20 years later, I met Swami Kriyananda, who has an Indian name but is an American, was an American, and he was a direct disciple of Yogananda. I met him in 1969 when all of this was just starting. I was in a dynamic place like San Francisco at that time when all of this was really beginning. I met Swami Kriyananda, I was 22 years old. As soon as he walked into the room, he hadn't even spoken. He just walked into the room. Now I know about reincarnation. I just recognized that this is what I'd been waiting for, because he was the first person that I ever saw in my life. Of course, I was the grand old age of 22, which seemed pretty old to me at the time. In retrospect, not so. But nonetheless, I was pretty much at sea. I knew about Indian teachings. By the grace of God, I'd started studying these teachings 3 or 4 years earlier, pretty early in life, 18. But I had no examples, and I had no practical way to make all of these ideals my life. I was raised in a Jewish family, so being a Catholic nun was not a good idea. Being a Protestant missionary didn't work so well either, and I was much too cowardly just to go off to India by myself. Just wasn't an option. But then, right a few miles from where I was living in Palo Alto at that time, right at Stanford University, I'm sitting in this room and Swami Kriyananda walks in. And my inner voice said, he has what I want. It was very odd because I didn't really know what I wanted, but I could tell that I had never seen anything I wanted before I met him. That's the best way to say it. As I got to know him and listened to him even that evening, he was joyful, he was dynamic, he was extremely grounded. There was no like flying off to some dimensions that I couldn't even imagine. It was just, here we are, this is our lives, but we can make it a whole lot better. And it just absolutely captivated me. I had karma that I had to untie, so it took me a little more than a year before I could leave what I was doing and move to what then was a very primitive beginning community called Ananda, now called Ananda Village, up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I've never looked back, ever. I've never been outside. I've moved to Palo Alto again, to Silicon Valley. I was integral in starting a very thriving community there. So it's not that I've lived isolated, but it's always been in this context. This is my karma. But Ananda by nature is very practical. So before Swami died, he died in 2013, the last year of his life, he said to me, travel as much as you can. And so it took me a while to get started, but that's basically what I've been doing since. But then the internet and social media came. So now I travel an enormous amount from wherever I'm standing. So if whatever number of hours I spend talking to you here is insufficient, trust me, you have a lot of other choices. And that's why we film. As I was saying to some of you, we film everything because you can send it all around the world. Now you can push the button and have it in your own language. So amazing, amazing, amazing. Now I want to address the subject that I've been invited to talk about, which is the deeper other side of yoga, which is what it was created for. And none of this is likely to be news to you. So it's not like I'm going to be telling you some great secret that you might not already know. I mean, here we are in this temple. It implies a lot that is more than just bending your body. I read recently, maybe she's very well known. Oh, it's here. It's one of the gals who's coming here. And her yoga, she calls her yoga, "My body don't bend that way." I'm very much looking forward to meeting her because talk about brilliant, right there you really get it. Meaning that there's more involved here than just whether your body bends that way. It's so much is implied. My own particular history in this, as I was telling you just back at the beginning, let me just do the math, would have been the summer of 1966. And I was in California already. I was in Southern California. It doesn't matter. This is just me showing you that I still have a memory. That was just a demonstration. But the point was, one of the quickest ways to start transforming ourselves is through our physical body, because we're in it. And it's concrete, and we can begin to do things that show us that we can be different. Like many, I started a little bit with yoga postures, but to be perfectly honest, I never stayed with it very long. I started with diet. Diet was one that really got me. I became a food fanatic, a position I held for quite a few years. I lost it, actually, after I moved to Ananda, and I was there with Swami Kriyananda. I had not eaten sugar probably for close to 5 years. I now knew about the concept of absolute God realization, so I figured not eating sugar for 5 years would qualify me to be pretty close to God by that point. As there was the math was off and the cause and effect was off a little bit. And from the very beginning, I had a very interactive relationship with Swami Kriyananda, and he took me in hand in a very gentle, effective way. But he was trying to get me to see a bigger world. I mean, that's what I'm going to be talking about now. How big are the possibilities? How far do the possibilities go? What is the edge of what we've gotten ourselves involved in? I don't just mean yoga. I mean being a human being and having a human body. What is the edge of what we've gotten ourselves involved in? Well, I was very rigid about my diet and had a very close, and I hope I'm not offending anyone here, a very close association between virtue and diet, and between God realization and diet. They're a little too strong an alliance. The Ananda community where we lived was about 20 miles from the nearest town. And at that time, the community was so primitive, we didn't have any resources on our own land. So whenever we went to town, we would indulge in the things that a small town could give you. It wasn't a big city, it was a tiny town, but there was an ice cream shop. And so it was part of going to town was to go to Swenson's ice cream parlor, but I was being just introduced to this. And I was with a group of about 8 people with Swami Kriyananda. I don't know why we went to town. And so we sat at this table, and just as life would have it, he was at the head of the table and I was at the foot of the table, and the others were arrayed like this. And everybody is really excited because they have ice cream sundaes of all different kinds, and everybody's talking about the flavors and the toppings and the syrups. And there's, in memory, it was like a movie scene with sort of all this energy going back and forth. I am sitting at the foot of the table, and they're ordering this banana split and this and this. And she comes to me. I said, "Water, please, no ice." And so I'm sitting at the head of the table, and then all the ice cream come. And again, it's very exaggerated, but I remember Swami Kriyananda reaching across the table to sample this one, people passing everything around, and me just sipping my room temperature water. Now, I had come there, as I was saying to you earlier, because Swami Kriyananda had absolutely captured me, just captured my aspirations, is how I would put it. I've always been when I'm in, I'm all in. But I had never found anything I could give myself to, and now I had. God realization, building this community. We had a retreat so we could serve others. Just had everything I had wanted. And I knew that the key to it was this man, because he had it. He had realization. He had the consciousness. So I'm sitting there, and I'm brand new. Like, this was my first year, I think, or less. I'm sitting here drinking water, and everybody else is eating ice cream, including him. And thank God, and I thank God deeply for this, I had the humility to consider that maybe I was wrong. Oh, novel thought. You know, I'm a smart girl, and I was always school smart, which is the only way people measured you in those days. So I had a lot of confidence in myself, but by the grace of God, it occurred to me that I was wrong. And it was the beginning of saying, it's not that I'm stupid. It's not that I need somebody else to tell me what to do, but maybe I don't know everything. And I don't just mean that in a graphic way. It's just maybe there are dimensions of understanding that I just haven't come to yet. Because anywhere we're standing, there's always going to be something new. I mean, I hope there is. Something that we're just learning. And then when you come to know something, you didn't know it before. And so how far does that go? That's really the basic question. How far does that go? If I never imagined that this reality was here, how many other realities have I never imagined? And that's what makes the difference between becoming what Yogananda called a psychological antique and actually remaining alive and awake and using your incarnation for what it was meant for. Swami, Master, I call Yogananda Master, I call Kriyananda Swamiji, so those vocabularies will come out of me. I reference them often because I am not the source of what I'm offering you. And I feel that the source is very important, because we can make up anything, and if you're clever, you can make it sound good. So you have to ask, this is science, what is the real evidence behind what you're saying? So I have a lineage, I represent a lineage, and as I was saying earlier, it's not because I'm not trying to convert you to anything. I just want you to know that there's more behind what I'm saying than just me, which is why I always have pictures of my inspiration behind me, just so that I won't forget and you won't forget, you know, what I'm talking about here. Now I have to trace that back to where I was when I went off on that. What was I talking about? Oh, I was talking about things that psychological antique, there it is. Yogananda made the comment, he said, it's not always a question of age, but sometimes people just age to the point where they're just not able to learn anything more. And then there's just no choice but to take them out of the body and let them start over. I had a couple, and that time older, because they were probably younger. No, they were as old as I am now, but I was much younger than I am now. But he and she, and they'd been married, had a very lovely marriage for 50 years or something at that point. But it was very interesting because they demonstrated the two choices that you can develop in your life, however old you are. She was totally in the moment. And when there would be guests at the table, or I was actually living in their house helping to take care of them because he was ill at that time. But that's not the cause of what I'm going to say. But there we were. But she was always in the moment, always conscious of realities other than her own and responding to what was going on around her. He would essentially wait until something came across the conversation that related to something he already knew. And then he would step into the conversation, and he was very entertaining and interesting, so it was pleasant to be with him. But I began to observe that he was always telling us what he already knew, and she was always learning what was happening in the moment. Okay? So that's just a very small example, but what the real question we're asking, because yoga is an extremely ancient science. I mean, they really cannot say how old it is. There's carvings and pictures from thousands of years ago in India, in the recognizable yoga postures. So there it is. It's always been there. And how old was it at that point? There's lots of explanations about this, which on Sunday we're doing a question and answer. If we haven't gotten to it by then, we can talk about that. But the point is, this is about human nature. This is not about time and place. And this is also not just about physical well-being. Everything that's just physical well-being, it's so ephemeral. It's very, very nice, of course. In fact, it's an enormous benefit in your life to have a strong body that will respond to what you want it to do. Having a body that won't respond can be an extreme detriment to everything else that we're trying to do. But you probably are perfectly aware that this body is a temporary temple, isn't it? And we all know people who are no longer with us. I have a great many friends who are now on the other side. It startles me sometimes to realize how many friends I have on the other side that are still there, that are still being themselves, that are still going on with their actual life. But the body alone is not anything that we can maintain indefinitely. So we have to start asking, and you have to ask, what happens when we die? Is that the end of the story? And of course, yoga opens us up to the whole Eastern idea of reincarnation and of the eternal nature of consciousness. So again, we can discuss this, but it's impossible for me to talk about any of these subjects without believing that this one life, this one body, is just a chapter in a great big book. You know, all of us, if we think about it, I mean, even as little children, we had a distinct identity, which was different, even from your own siblings. Any woman who's given birth to more than one child, almost any woman, will tell you that from conception, there's somebody there, and it's not the same one who was there before, because it all begins like that. We recognize each other. What is love at first sight? You know, it's very simple. It's not first sight, that's all. It's just, oh, there you are. You know, I've certainly had that experience. What is, oh my God, there you are again also. You know? In fact, Yogananda said sometimes enemies incarnate into the same family so they can fight it out at close quarters. I mean, that's not a happy story, but unfortunately, some of you may know that story, right? I knew a very unfortunate case where the woman gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Boy was an old friend, girl was an old enemy. And that was a very difficult upbringing. That was a rather chaotic household, you know, because antipathy, hatred of any kind, also becomes a magnetic force within us. Isn't that so? If you really have a strong aversion, and maybe I'm the only one who has conversations sometimes with people who aren't in the room and may have not been in the room for a really long time, and I'm just playing it out again, and this time they listen to me, you know? But every time that happens, which I try not to let it happen, but I see my mind wander because there's a vortex of energy that is circling around whatever that reality is. That's what your chakras are. Your chakras are vortexes of energy with a center point of commitment of I'm the victim, you treated me wrong, or you're the hero, and if I can just be with you again. And those vortexes of energy are the energy pattern, and that pattern is constantly being mutated by every thought, action, and feeling that you express. And then when we die, and we all know this now from the movies, in addition to all the near-death and return experiences that we have, the body goes away, but you're still there. Everything that makes you you is still there. We think it's this physical body, but it isn't. It's the inner consciousness that we're always experiencing. So if, for the sake of this discussion, it has to be so, if we have more than one lifetime, if we continually change and progress, how far does that possible progression go? And what does it look like? And why are we paying attention to anything else? This is the story of the Buddha. The Buddha was, when he was born to a great king, But the prophecy at the time of his birth was that this was an extraordinary character who would have an enormous life, and he would either be a great king following in the steps of his father, or he would renounce everything and live the opposite of what his father wanted. So his father made the decision for his son, that being a great king was obviously the best way to go, and having the power to do so, he created an entire environment for his son to grow up in which there would be no hint of old age, sickness, or death. And there's a wonderful poetic writing called The Light of Asia by Sir Edwin Arnold. And it talks about, all the people and servants around him were young. Every night while he was sleeping, all the dead flowers would be taken out and replaced by fresh flowers. It's a poetic picture, but the point is, and it was a huge compound, and he never left it. And he just grew up thinking that this was true, and he married a beautiful woman, and she was about to give birth to their first child, or close in all that time. And finally, he began to understand that there was something outside the wall. And he persuaded his friend that he told his father he wanted to see what was outside the wall. So the father had everyone in town, everybody old and sick was hidden away, every dead leaf was swept away. And so he paraded through the town, and everything looked the same as it did inside his pleasure garden, until he saw, some person who looked ill. Then he said to his friend, what is wrong with him? Oh, well, this is what happens. So then Buddha said, I've seen enough, take me back. And then he plotted with his friend, and he went out to go into the city without the king intervening. And he saw a corpse, and he saw the mourners of a corpse. He saw old people staggering with the debilitation that can come with age. He saw ill people. And in each one, he said to his friend, what is this? No, he said, this is the fate of everyone. Even if you escape the debilitations of age or sickness, you will eventually be on the funeral pyre. It's just that this is the fate of all. The Buddha says, why are we living the way we live then? Why are we just singing and dancing and acting as if this would just go on forever, when this is actually what we're doing? And then, of course, he left his wife before his son was born, and he became the Buddha instead of the great king. He fulfilled it that way. And that is the fundamental premise. Buddhism became a separate expression, but it was Sanatana Dharma. It was the eternal religion. Religion is something that man makes afterwards. All the great sages perceive. They have a revelation of dimensions of reality that are there to be perceived, but we haven't trained ourselves to perceive them. I mean, think about, just even in your own life, the difference of capacity to perceive in the people that you know. People are very different in what they can perceive. Here's the same question. How far does that extend? If this one is more perceptive than I, and this one is less perceptive than I am, how far does it go above me? And this is what the saints and masters present to us. It can go all the way to infinity. And the entire science of yoga, and it's a science, it's an evidence-based system that is not just a matter of opinion, but can be replicated by anybody who tries it. That's what science really is. It's not about test tubes and things like that. It's just making your decisions on the basis of evidence that you yourself can experience. And so the Buddha comes out and finds out that people die, and then he starts asking a very different question. What is the purpose of life? And then even much more profoundly, if this happiness that he clings to, his young wife, his beautiful baby son, who he leaves before the baby is born. This is all in the beautiful Light of Asia. It's just breathtakingly beautiful. As he describes, 3 times he tried to leave, and 3 times he came back. And then he was finally able to tear himself away. And he says in this poetic rendition, He says, they will say that because I left you, I didn't love you. He said, but because I loved you the most, I felt I had to seek an answer that would give you all that I really want to give you, which is not just a happy day, but eternal bliss. Something that won't just be snatched away as the body ages and when the body dies. And so this is really what yoga is, which sounds pretty grand, and all of us can now just walk out and without anything in our hands and walk barefoot into wherever city we're in right now, no, that's not what's being asked of us. It's very different than that. Because the other aspect, the most fundamental aspect of yoga, which changes it a little bit from being physical, it's all about consciousness. It's not about the form. And one of the things that's happening in our particular time is that the whole planet that we're living on, and this is again part of Sanatana Dharma, part of this ancient wisdom, is that the planets go through cycles, not humanity, but the planet itself has an orbit that moves it closer and farther away of the center of our galaxy. These are very big stories, but I can fill them out over the next few days. The closer that our planet comes to the center of the galaxy, the more enlightened and energized the planet is. The civilization on the planet changes. And then it reaches its closest point, then it begins to move away. And so we are at the beginning of what everyone's rightly calling a new age. And it really began in the 1900s. And people become more enlightened and more capable of perceiving on a more subtle level. Swami Kriyananda's father was an oil geologist, and he went to many different countries in Europe, and he went to Romania, and that's where Kriyananda actually happened to be born and was raised, even though he's American. And oil had been bubbling up out of the ground in Romania for as long as anybody knew, this slimy black substance, but nobody had understood what you could do with it. So it wasn't like oil was invented, by somebody in a chemist shop. It was that people began to see a potential that they hadn't seen before. And what happened around 1900 is people began to see potentials that they hadn't seen before. And so we now have airplanes and the internet and social media and all these different things. But nobody created new natural laws. Is that people were enlightened enough to perceive those new laws. And I live in Silicon Valley, which is the home of Apple Computer. And it's well known that Steve Jobs, the real inspiring force of that, had an extremely close interrelationship with Yogananda. Famously, the only book on Steve Jobs' iPad was Autobiography of a Yogi, which he conscientiously read once every year. And he single-handedly helped bring in this whole new age because he just dissolved time and space. Other people thought time and space was an obstacle, and he figured out how it wasn't. It's just like this. Now, these are all outward things. So part of it, is that now we're all just realizing potentials. And because of all the medical advancements, now people are dying and coming back. And we never knew, except I'm sure it happened to a few people, but now it happens all the time. And then thanks to Steve Jobs and his cronies, anybody anywhere who has a near-death experience, we can all read about it, see his face, see a little drawing of the beings that he met on the other side. And the whole idea that we actually end the difference between form, the body ends, the consciousness goes on. So what do we want to invest in? The oddest thing, at the age that I am in my life, which is not as young as I used to be, which of course is true of everyone, I think I'm closer to the end than the beginning, let's just put it that way. It's been predicted of me that I have quite a few decades to go, but we'll see whether that's true or not. But the thought in my mind is, anything that is not resolved now, I'm going to have to resolve later. But when later comes, it's going to be now. Can you follow that? The now that I'm dealing with used to be later, but it caught up with me. Now, that might not make much sense, but it's extremely compelling to me. Okay? In other words, how should we really be living? And yoga, the body the physical yoga is a great doorway into it, because we begin to realize that we can do things that really affect our consciousness. The way Swami Kriyananda expressed Hatha Yoga was he called it yoga for self-awareness. Am I correct? Yes. And he put affirmations to it. I mean, all of this is not unusual anymore. When he started 50 or 60 years ago, it was. Higher awareness, yoga for higher awareness, because the things that we do with our body influence our consciousness. Isn't that obvious? We all know that. That's where I started with diet. I began to discover, I've been a vegetarian. When I first started as a vegetarian, my relatives thought I would die. And I had to write out my whole diet, die soon. So I had to write out my whole diet, everything, and I had to submit it to an objective medical opinion. By the grace of God, we got the right doctor. The doctor said it was the healthiest diet he had ever seen, and they were all going to die, and I would still be going strong. So that was the end of the argument. But people get the point. But it made a difference to me. The last time I ate meat, I accidentally ate some meat in Switzerland because the concept of vegetarian was hard to get across wherever we were. And what they gave me was so delicious, it took me a little time to realize it was bacon. But in any case, prior to that, that was when I was a student in university. I had a very brief college career. I lost interest in 2 weeks. Took me the whole year to flunk out, but I lost interest in 2 weeks. Because they weren't wise. They were intelligent. They were very intelligent, and they were very skilled in countless things that I didn't care about, but they weren't wise. And I had that demonstrated to me. Well, I'll be very frank about it. We're all friends. One of my English teachers tried to seduce me, which in and of itself didn't bother me that much because I was a child of the 60s. But he was married and had 3 children. And I thought, you are a moron. And only later did I realize what I said. I said, well, actually, I'm reading a very good book. I think I'd rather go home. Which I thought later, well, that was a good line. But my real thought was just like, I'm here to find out how to live, and you're showing me that you know nothing about how to live. So that was close to the end of the second week, when I just let it go. But the Grateful Dead was starting up right in Palo Alto at that time. And nobody knew about them yet, and they were just starting, and every Friday there would be a party somewhere, and we'd just all go and just dance all night. So I had a great year. Now I've totally lost the thread again. Oh, yes, that we do things with diet. Oh, yes, the hamburger, there we have it. The last thing I had was a hamburger at this sort of little outdoor place, and I the bun and the lettuce and the tomato, it's very vivid in my mind, and I'll tell you why. This was probably literally 55 years ago. I can still see it. Because that night, the entire night, I dreamt that the whole thing was moving through my veins. Not masticated, but just the entire burger like this. And in my dream, it would move, and it would just be this big lump, and it would go like this over. That was the end. It's like, I may be dumb, but that one really got me. Every time I think about it, it makes me shudder again. So we start discovering that there's things we can do that will change our consciousness. And then we start deciding, and here's where the real issue is. And you will hear me say this over and over again this weekend, because I always say it. Every single thing that we do, every decision that you make, if you think about it carefully, you will realize you always do what you do because you think it will increase your happiness and it will decrease your suffering. And that's the only reason we make any decision. There's a cookie downstairs in the freezer in the house that I live in. It's the middle of the night and I'm awake. I made that cookie. It's a good cookie. It's downstairs. It can be eaten right out of the freezer. I say, it's the middle of the night. I don't need to get up and go eat that cookie. But I believe that the happiness of eating the cookie, you know, is better than just lying there thinking about it. And even the suffering of being awake in the middle of the night now because I've eaten this cookie is less than the happiness of eating the cookie. And that doesn't even take into account writing the email that I shouldn't have sent and all of the other things. But why do we do it? Because we think it will make us happy. And one of my personal little mantras that I use now to try to keep myself from being too upset about these things is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. It's just as simple as that, because it always did. I mean, here we are, and tomorrow we're talking about turbulent times on this planet. Why did we incarnate at this time? I don't know, it seemed like a good idea at the time, But here we are because we thought it would increase our happiness and decrease our suffering. So the real question about everything that you're doing is, am I really perceiving this correctly? Because that's what we want. And it's not so simple. I mean, I reduce it down to a cookie, but it's by no means that simple. Do I stay married to this person? What town do I live in? Do I have a second child? What do I do about my poor son who's addicted to drugs? Do I keep enabling him? Do I cut him off? Do I keep drinking alcohol or do I stop? I mean, how big are the questions? And every one of them is the dynamic of happiness and suffering. And Sanatana Dharma, which is the Sanskrit word for all of the ancient teachings of India, which is sometimes called the eternal religion, but the word religion gets confusing. So I prefer the definition, that which is. Because we are made in a certain way, and this is what Sanatana Dharma is. It's a very, very refined revelation about the way that we're made. That we can have lots of variations in the basic story. I mean, it's so much fun for me to meet so many new people in so many different places. We're all speaking English without a translator, which is always more fun for me, but I'm getting used to the other two. But every one of you is recognizably yourself. Do you not ever find that odd? That we all are expressing something that is completely different than everybody else. And so on one hand, and this is one of these intriguing balances, on one hand, we have this absolute uniqueness. And on the other hand, we have this enormous sameness. That whenever you try to self-declare that this is what is, and so this is another useful concept, which is reality always wins. And you can have as many opinions about it as you want, but in the end, that which is will prove to be true. And so what yoga is about is to give us an ever-increasing opportunity to perceive and experience that which is, for the simple purpose of finding out what's going to bring us happiness and what's going to cause us suffering. Think about anything, any decision you've made, anything you've learned in your life, and here's another aspect to it. We don't actually learn things. I mean, we do learn skills and knowledge and things like that, but learning about who I am and what really brings me happiness comes to us as a realization. In other words, we recognize it. This is something that Swami Kriyananda has shared with all of us, like myself, and I'm part of a whole tribe of people who talk like this, is that we don't really teach anything. I don't use the word teacher when I think about myself, but I try to explain it in such a way that you will recognize it. And you will recognize it because your own vibration, somehow the words will match something that you yourself have already experienced. And when we finally know something, I realize that that particular habit is not going to help me. I realize that this job is not good for me. I realize that this is not the right relationship. I realize that this is the right relationship. And that's the actual word we use, isn't it? Oh, I just realized, like that. And so you have to ask the question again, how much is there that we haven't yet realized? Which is why Yogananda called his entire mission self-realization. But that self has a capital S on it, which is to realize what is really going on inside of me for the purpose of happiness and suffering. And what this wonderful way of looking at it helps us do is that we have an experiential way of measuring. And it's a way to make our practices, whatever those practices might be, authentic to our actual experience. Because a lot of times we try to work out someone else's karma because it looks easier or more attractive or more interesting. When I first started on this path, I read in one of Yogananda's books, he had the wonderful phrase, portable paradise. Speaking of the potential of meditation, we have within us a portable paradise. And you just make things up. I thought, 5 years I'll have it together and I'll be able to just open the door to that portable paradise. Anytime I want, I just totally made that up. I have no idea. As the 5-year mark came and went, I tried not to embarrass myself, realizing, you see there? Isn't that interesting? I just use it on my own. I realized that I just made that up. And I began to try to understand what was really happening instead of what I thought was happening. It's actually beginning to ask the question, what is really going on? And answering it on a higher and higher level. So that because the realization goes all the way to infinity. This is self-realization, God realization. Who am I really? And then the more that I know who I am, and the more I live by this intuitive flow, which is part of who I am, the less I live by my imposing of my ideas on the world around me. Swami Kriyananda made this statement, which I'm not going to quote the words exactly, but this is the concept of it. He said, in the spiritual world, there's often this word worldly and spiritual, and these opposites are created. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, what is day to the worldly man is night to the yogi. And what is night to the yogi is day to the worldly man, meaning that everything flips over, which is a very unattractive and very bad marketing, extremely so. When I first started on the spiritual path, I don't know why, but somehow neophytes get totally infatuated with giving up all your desires, at least as a theory, not necessarily as a practice, but as a theory. And so here I am, 19 years old, I believe, at this time, and I'm working on my first conversion. I'm the first person I'm going to persuade of these teachings. I was shades of my future life. And so I start talking to her, and she was, quote, worldly. I said, have you noticed that when you really have a desire for something, that even if you manage to get it, that after a while, it doesn't feel the same to you? And she's with me all the way about wanting things, and sometimes they're a little disappointing, and I'm just about to close the deal on her like this, and she agrees with me that desires just are disappointing, and then she says, total, that's why it's so important to keep on wanting new things. I thought, well, scratch that one. But that is how we work with it, isn't it? But what the Gita, this very bad marketing, tells us the opposites. But it isn't really about that. Not now. Now is not the time when we just leave everything behind. Everybody wants to be spiritual where they're standing. And that's a God-given inclination right now. We're trying to transform our everyday life, not throw it away and start something else. So Swami put it like this. Worldly means to believe that the material world is the final arbiter of everything. And the outer world is the final arbiter. I'm important because you think I am. I'm important and I'm worthwhile because I made a lot of money. I'm important and worthwhile because, well, I have a lot of followers on social media. Or like whatever it is. And that's what it is to be worldly. It's not whether you are rich or successful or have a lot of followers on social media. It's whether or not your sense of self is created for you by the world outside of you. And what it is to be a spiritual person, a yogi, in the truest sense of the word, is to realize that I am part of this greater reality. Even though my body is separate and my destiny is unique, I am interwoven in ways that are absolutely inextricable. This Buddhist teacher was talking about when she really began to understand the interwoven nature of reality. She had to cancel an important program because she'd been taking care of her grandchild. The grandchild was sick, sneezed in her face. She caught the disease, whatever it was, as babies give to their loving parents, and she couldn't come to the program. So she couldn't come to the program, so she starts thinking, because I was taking care of my grandchild, how does it happen that I have a grandchild? Well, I have a grandchild because I have a daughter. How did it happen that I have a daughter? Well, I have a daughter because I have a husband. How did I happen to get a husband? Well, because I chose to go to this certain university. Why did I go to that university? Because my grandfather went to that university. On and on. So she's finally standing in the bookstore near the university when her husband walks in. And it's love at first sight. So where do you cut it? Where do you say that I'm in charge of my own destiny? Because the one who thinks that the external world is real, there's always this pressure to make your life work. Because if you're just out there all by yourself, you have to be making your life work. Don't misunderstand me. You have to put out energy. But you're not making your life work against a hostile universe. We see ourselves as part of this long, enormous tapestry of previous lifetimes we can put into it also, in which the threads are all connected and nothing can be cut out. So the yogi tries to attune himself or herself to that pattern, what is trying to unfold, and then tries to, through that attunement, to cooperate with that unfolding. And this is where Divine Mother is a great friend, trust me. You know, what do you want from me? What are we trying to accomplish? Just like a good child listens to its mother, a good yogi listens to the greater loving wisdom of the universe. What are we trying to accomplish here? And then how can I facilitate that unfoldment? Not how can I be at war? And that is the opposite. Because once you're cooperating, it may be your destiny to become the CEO of the biggest company. Maybe it's your destiny to be the Steve Jobs number 2, you know? You don't know what it could be, but we feel it from the inside, and then you see, where does happiness come from? What causes suffering? You know, when even if difficulties come, if those difficulties come because we know we're moving with the flow of our own karma, instead of just out here by ourselves trying to make it happen. You see how magnificent all of this is? And it all starts because, and I can only bend this far, you bend over and all of a sudden everything, you feel the energy, don't you? I mean, that's where we begin, where we get the evidence right away. And then how much more is there that I just don't know? And that's why we come together like this, because we can make so much more happen, you know, when we're all in a spirit like this.